How to turn emotional distance into attraction. Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the person closest to your heart suddenly feels like a stranger. You sit beside them, yet the silence is deafening. You look into their eyes and realize they're not looking back into yours the same way anymore. The emotional gap becomes so wide that love starts feeling like a memory, not a moment. But what if I told you that this distance does not always signify the end? What if I told you that emotional distance, instead of breaking the bond, can become a catalyst for deeper connection, stronger attraction, and rebirth of intimacy? Sometimes, the space between two hearts is not a wall, it's a bridge waiting to be built. We often try to force closeness, thinking that love only survives in proximity, in constant validation, in daily reassurances. But love is not chained to presence. Love is energy. Love is healing. Love is freedom. And in that freedom, we can find the secret to converting emotional silence into soulful symphony. The pain you feel today can become the passion that reconnects you tomorrow. The disconnect you sense is not always rejection, it may be a request for renewal. Let us explore 5 powerful truths, 5 emotional pathways that show us how to turn emotional distance into magnetism, into attraction, into something stronger than it ever was. 1. Create space for healing, not escaping. When people start creating emotional distance, the first feeling that grips our heart is fear. It feels like being left behind in the very journey you thought you were taking together. The mind begins to spiral. What did I do wrong? Why are they pulling away? We panic, we overthink, and in that emotional chaos, we tend to chase. But the truth is, distance isn't always a declaration of detachment. It can also be a silent cry for healing. It can be a space that's calling for softness instead of suffocation, a pause that isn't meant to break the bond but to strengthen the foundation of it. It is in that space, when approached with wisdom and not wounded pride, that hearts can begin to breathe again. We live in a world where we are taught to fight for what we love, but nobody tells us that sometimes fighting means standing still. It means letting go of the urge to fix everything in the moment. It means resisting the temptation to force closeness and instead allowing space to become sacred. Not every retreat is a rejection. Sometimes it's a person's way of finding their center again. And if we truly care, we must offer them that room, not as a form of punishment or passive aggression, but as an act of compassion. Because love doesn't only live in presence, it also lives in patience. Giving space doesn't mean walking away with a hardened heart. It means standing in quiet strength, showing the other person that you respect their emotions enough to not invade them when they need solitude. It's a gesture that says, I see your need to be alone, and I will not make you feel guilty for it. This kind of emotional maturity builds invisible bridges. It sends a silent but powerful message. I trust you'll come back when you're ready. Until then, I'll be here not waiting in desperation, but standing in understanding. That space must also become your sanctuary. It is a chance for you to reflect, not on their actions, but on your own soul. Ask yourself, what have I forgotten about myself while being emotionally invested in someone else? Begin nurturing that forgotten version of you. Reconnect with the parts of yourself that used to shine even before this connection existed. Sometimes, emotional distance shows up to remind you that you were never meant to lose yourself in love. You were meant to find more of yourself through it. Let your stillness become a source of peace, not punishment. Let your silence echo empathy, not ego. When you create space with kindness, you create an emotional environment where healing becomes possible for both you and the other person. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop panicking and start praying, not for outcomes, but for clarity. And in that clarity, the heart begins to whisper answers the mind was too loud to hear. This journey is not about retreating from love, it is about returning to it with more depth. When two people have room to reflect and grow individually, they often come back together with a renewed sense of who they are and why they began. It is in the silent moments, in the long pauses, in the temporary distance, that emotional gravity begins to form. The kind of gravity that doesn't pull through force, but attracts through grace. And so you create space not because you're giving up, but because you believe in something greater than momentary reassurance. You believe in soulful restoration. You create space because love that is true doesn't vanish in silence, it strengthens. It duane that kind of love. Emotional distance is not the end. It's the beginning of something braver, something more beautiful, something worth waiting and healing for too. Communicate with vulnerability, not strategy. There is a moment in every emotional journey when we are tempted to use silence as a weapon, words as strategies, and gestures as tactics. We become consumed with thoughts like, how do I make them miss me? Or, what should I say to make them come back? And unknowingly, we turn our emotional pain into a game of manipulation. But love was never built to survive through mind games. It was never meant to be a puzzle someone has to solve to feel seen. True connection is born not from controlling reactions, but from courageous vulnerability. From that brave space where we speak not to get a result, but to reveal our soul. When you feel someone drifting away, it's easy to wear masks, to act unbothered, to pretend their silence doesn't hurt. But pretending doesn't make you powerful, it makes you invisible to the very person you're trying to reach. Vulnerability, on the other hand, makes you unforgettable. It opens a window to your soul and invites the other person to look through without fear of judgment. It says, here I am, without filters. I'm not perfect, but I'm real. And in a world where everyone is trying to appear strong, being real is the most attractive quality you can offer. There is so much power in saying, I feel disconnected, not as an accusation, but as an offering of truth. So much beauty in whispering, I miss the way we used to be, not with desperation, but with dignity. These words don't make you weak, they make you deeply human. They let the other person know that beyond the distance, your heart is still beating for the connection. And sometimes that's all someone needs to hear to soften their silence and step forward again. It takes courage to show your emotional scars before they're healed. It takes strength to admit your fears while they're still shaking your voice. But vulnerability doesn't demand perfection, it asks only for honesty. When you speak your truth with softness, when you share your feelings without a script, you invite someone to feel safe enough to meet you in that same raw space. And emotional safety is the first step toward emotional intimacy. No mask, no performance, just two souls remembering why they connected in the first place. Don't fall into the trap of using absence as punishment or words as tools to provoke guilt. Instead, use your voice as a bridge. Use your truth as the path. Because when someone sees you standing fully in your emotions, not hiding them or dressing them in pride, they begin to see a version of you that is magnetic in its authenticity. And that kind of realness is what creates the gravity that pulls people back into each other's orbit. Even if your vulnerability isn't met with immediate warmth, it still matters. Because in speaking from your soul, you begin to free yourself. You begin to validate your own emotions, even if no one else does. You begin to attract not just a person, but a kind of connection that is grounded in truth, not performance. That is how emotional distance begins to fade, not through drama, but through depth. Not through shouting, but through soulful conversation. And so, dare to be vulnerable. Even when it scares you, even when it feels like you're standing naked in front of someone who might walk away. Because the ones who truly matter, the ones whose hearts are aligned with yours, they will not run from your truth. They will run toward it. And in that courageous, unfiltered space, emotional attraction will rise again, not out of fear, but out of the freedom to simply be known, be heard, and be felt completely. 3, cultivate self-worth, not dependence. There comes a moment in every relationship where the silence becomes louder than the conversations, where the distance feels colder than absence, and where your heart aches not from what they did, but from what you started believing about yourself in their silence. You begin to feel like maybe you're not enough, maybe you did too much, maybe you should have done less. This spiral is dangerous because emotional distance often awakens our deepest insecurities. But it also presents a sacred opportunity to meet yourself again, not as someone begging for love, but as someone remembering their own worth. It is in the ache of someone else's absence that we often discover how present we've been for everyone but ourselves. You sit there wondering if they'll come back, but have you asked if you have come back to yourself yet? When emotional dependence takes over, we forget our own identity in the echo of someone else's silence. We start seeking validation from a person who may be too lost in their own world to give it. But love is not meant to be begged for. Attention is not supposed to be earned through pain. And your value is not defined by how closely someone clings to you in a moment of distance. Start by returning to your passions. Revisit the pieces of yourself that once made your soul light up. Before love entered, before emotional disconnection dimmed your fire, the things you stopped doing because you got too busy being available for someone else, pick those up again. Paint, dance, read, write, grow. When you start nurturing your joy, you begin to radiate a kind of energy that attracts, not pleads. People are drawn to light, not to the darkness of desperation, and your light lives in your alignment with your own heart. Don't confuse emotional closeness with emotional dependence. One is a choice, the other is a cage. You were not born to attach your self-worth to how someone else treats you in moments of doubt. You were born to become your own sanctuary first. The person who learns to soothe their own pain, to hold their own brokenness, to comfort their own silence becomes the kind of soul no one wants to lose. Because that soul radiates peace, not pressure. Confidence, not control. The truth is, attraction doesn't grow in neediness. It blossoms in emotional independence. When someone sees that you're not collapsing in their absence, but instead rising in your solitude, they begin to look at you differently. Not as someone who needs them to survive, but as someone they long to thrive beside. You stop being an emotional responsibility and start becoming a soulful inspiration. And that shift is what brings hearts back, not because they're guilty, but because they're gravitated. This time is not about waiting. It's about evolving. It's about remembering that you are a whole universe, not a half waiting to be completed. You are not here to audition for love. You are here to embody it. The more you invest in yourself, the more powerful your emotional presence becomes. You stop trying to prove your worth and start standing in it. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop asking, why don't they see me? And start declaring, I see myself. And so, instead of drowning in emotional dependence, choose to rise in emotional sovereignty. Not because you're giving up on them, but because you're finally showing up for you. And when they look back and see the fire you've reignited, the peace you've reclaimed, and the joy you've rebuilt, they won't be able to look away. Because in a world full of people trying to be loved, the one who learns to love themselves becomes irresistible. Mirror their needs, not their neglect. There is a quiet temptation that creeps in when someone grows distant. We start mirroring their withdrawal. If they stop reaching out, we stop responding. If they speak less, we go silent. If they seem cold, we freeze too. But copying someone's emotional neglect doesn't create connection, it creates walls. And what we often don't see in our pride is that sometimes the person pulling away is not testing us. They're silently hoping we'll understand what they cannot express. Emotional distance can be a silent language of pain. And if all we mirror is their coldness, we'll miss the chance to reflect their need for healing. It is easy to respond with ego. It is easy to take their silence personally, to assume it's about us. But sometimes it's not about us at all. Sometimes people withdraw because they are overwhelmed by their own emotions. They don't need our anger, they need our awareness. They don't need our silence, they need our strength. When someone creates distance, ask yourself, what fear might they be hiding? What pain are they protecting? What kind of love would help them feel safe again? Responding to emotional distance with empathy is not weakness, it's wisdom. It takes deep emotional intelligence to look past the behavior and into the soul. It takes maturity to say, I will not punish you for needing space, but I will remain emotionally available if you choose to come back. That doesn't mean sacrificing your self-respect. It means holding your boundaries with grace. It means letting your compassion be louder than your pride. Because healing begins not where we retaliate, but where we choose to understand. Being the emotionally stable one does not mean tolerating abuse or disrespect. It means choosing to lead the energy of the connection with intention. It means saying, even if you are lost in your own silence, I won't get lost in mine. You become the lighthouse in their emotional storm, the steady presence in their internal chaos, and whether or not they recognize it in the moment, that stability becomes a silent magnet. People don't remember who matched their pain, they remember who mirrored their need for peace. When you treat someone based on who they are at their lowest, you teach them what love can look like even in the darkness. This doesn't mean neglecting yourself, it means extending grace from a full heart, not an empty one. You don't become less by showing compassion. You become unforgettable by being the one who didn't give up when it was easier to walk away. And that kind of energy cannot be ignored forever. It leaves a mark on their soul, even if their ego resists it for now. Lead the emotional tone of the connection. If they're quiet, be calm. If they're distant, be grounded. Don't imitate their confusion, offer clarity. Don't reflect their fear, reflect your love. Because attraction is born not when you behave like them, but when you behave like the best version of yourself. People come back not to those who match their wounds, but to those who mirrored their healing. You don't pull them in by playing their game, you pull them in by changing the game with emotional maturity. So when distance arises, resist the urge to fight it with more distance. Instead, become the quiet presence that doesn't push but doesn't disappear. Become the voice that speaks gently even when the conversation goes cold. Because one day, when their storm passes and they're looking for a safe place to land, they'll remember the one person who didn't throw their silence back at them, but who offered love in return, not as a strategy, but as a mirror of what they were truly yearning for. 5. Use the distance to build deeper connection. Distance doesn't always mean disconnect. Sometimes it's an invitation to rebuild, a sacred pause asking you to look deeper than comfort, deeper than habit, and deeper than routine. Emotional distance often arrives disguised as a breakdown, but hidden beneath it is a blueprint, a quiet opportunity to rediscover not only the other person, but yourself within the relationship. Most people fear distance because they think it means love is fading. But love, if real, does not vanish with space. It transforms within it. It takes a new shape, not out of pressure, but out of choice. When someone becomes emotionally distant, our first instinct is to fill the silence with words, questions, assumptions. But what if, instead of reacting to the absence, you entered it like a sanctuary? What if the distance was a doorway, not a dead end? Use this time not to grieve what is temporarily quiet, but to explore the sound of your own heart. Revisit the shared memories that brought light to your soul. Reflect on what kind of emotional connection you're craving, not as a complaint, but as a compass. Distance gives you room to listen, not to the noise, but to the longing. In this space, start asking deeper questions, not about them, but about you both. When was the last time you saw each other as evolving beings, not as fixed personalities? Often, emotional gaps grow because we assume we already know each other. But people change. And love demands we keep discovering each other again and again. Let the distance be a gentle reminder that there are still corners of their soul you haven't touched and still stories of yours they haven't heard. Become curious again, not suspicious, curious. Curiosity rekindles attraction because it makes love feel alive. Reconnection is not found in forcing conversations or demanding attention. It's found in creating moments of emotional presence when the time is right. Write them a message not out of need, but out of genuine warmth. Share something from your day, not to check if they'll reply, but to let them feel your energy without pressure. Let your energy become light, not weight. Be the safe space they want to return to, not the battlefield they fear to enter. And as you do this, the emotional bond doesn't dissolve it. Deepens, quietly, organically, without force. Attraction isn't always about grand gestures. It's about understanding someone's silence and choosing to stay kind in it. It's about holding space for their journey without letting go of your truth. When someone feels they can be distant without being discarded, they feel emotionally safe. And emotional safety is the foundation of deep love. That safety says, even if you're figuring things out, I'm not walking away from your soul. That kind of love doesn't demand connection, it inspires it. Let the distance be your teacher. Learn how to love without clinging. Learn how to trust without controlling. Learn how to be emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. These are the quiet lessons that create loud shifts. The shifts that turn short-term attraction into long-term emotional intimacy. When two people learn to sit in silence without breaking, they become unbreakable. Not because they're perfect, but because they're patient enough to evolve through the uncomfortable. So don't run from the distance. Don't resent it. Respect it. Let it breathe life into your connection instead of taking life from it. Use it to rebuild, not retreat. Use it to deepen, not detach. Because the relationships that survive emotional distance are not the ones that were constantly close, but the ones that were deeply committed to closeness, even when the heart had to learn how to feel its way back through the quiet. In the end, emotional distance often arrives like a silent storm. It doesn't crash through your doors. It drifts in quietly and settles between glances, between silences, between all the words that go unspoken. It can feel like a slow unraveling of something once so beautiful. But hidden within that discomfort lies a quiet power. The power to rebuild connection, not through fear or desperation, but through emotional depth, spiritual maturity, and profound inner strength. This kind of distance isn't always the ending. It can be the invitation to a more meaningful beginning. Not a return to what once was, but a rise into what love can become when it is nurtured through understanding and patience. When you stop seeing emotional distance as a threat and start embracing it as a mirror, something within you shifts. You no longer chase closeness, you create it. You no longer fear space, you fill it with grace. You stop begging for love and start becoming love. Through healing space, raw vulnerability, cultivated self-worth, mirrored empathy, and deeper emotional discovery, the very thing that once separated two hearts can start pulling them back together. Stronger, softer, wiser, more magnetic than before. Because true emotional attraction doesn't spark from control, it flows from clarity. It's not forced into being, it's invited through growth, through presence, and through a love that's mature enough to stand the test of silence without breaking.